Alright guys, hope you're all keeping safe and staying indoors, even though in the UK today it's about 21 degrees, which for some of you will be like a winter's day, but here in the UK that's pretty hot. That's get down to the beach type weather. Now we've had both Title Update 8.4 and 8.5 released now, both of which have addressed balancing issues with the game along with other things. Today I wanted to give you my thoughts and feedback on these two updates essentially, and look at what you guys had to say as well. If you enjoy this one, drop a like down below, subscribe for Division 2 content, and let's begin. So I'm going to go over the biggest changes in my opinion with both updates, whether that be balancing or something else, and we'll just talk about them and give you my feedback. In Title Update 8.4 there was significant NPC balancing changes touted in the patch notes. Touted, I'm not even sure if that's the right word or even if that's a word that exists, but it's going in this video. And now these included reduced NPC damage output for all difficulties. We are adjusting health and armor based on activity difficulty, and this applies to hard and challenging difficulties where enemies will have lower health and armor compared to their current values, and reduce NPC health and armor for group scaling. Now I can't speak for group scaling because I've just not played in a group to test whether these changes have been significant or not, but a comment from GHC on my community post said, "I'm not convinced scaling is any better for player groups, even on challenging, the NPCs are still sponges." Now I would like to hear what your guys' experience is with group scaling following Title Update 8.4. I've not seen a whole lot of people say that it's any better than it was before, but I've not seen anyone say it's any worse, so it would be nice to see what you guys think of that in the comments below. I can speak as a solo player, as that's pretty much my entire experience. As you guys know, I pretty much play the game as a solo player, especially with challenging and heroic difficulty, mainly challenging. That's mainly what I play on. So to me, I would say that the changes made so far with these two updates are so incremental and subtle that it really doesn't feel that much different to how it was before, certainly as a solo player. Okay, now I know that generally Title Update 8.4 was addressing group scaling more than anything else, but from what I've seen, it hasn't done all that much. The good news is that the changes were incremental, they were small changes, and that is exactly the opposite of how Massive have previously balanced things. If you've been playing the Division 1 since day one, you know what Massive are like. Normally, you know, they take huge steps, and that kind of normally throws everything out of whack even more. You know, you'd say that maybe this weapon is a little bit overtuned and they would nerf it into the ground. You'd say that this weapon is, you know, absolutely terrible, and they would buff it as the best weapon in the game, and that's kind of how they've normally done it. But I'm glad that here they have decided to do incremental changes, and I think that's the right way of going about it. I would say that unless it's something like poison damage, which they did address and which was nerfed in Title Update 8.5, which did need a big nerf, then generally these incremental changes are good. And thankfully I can report that, at least for me, the poison damage is in a much better place now than before. Now I've seen people say that it's still too much. For me, as someone who runs a straight red M1A DPS build most of the time, I ran into Federal Emergency Bunker just to take the initial grenade from a red NPC, and it did chip damage, right? It didn't kill me. I stayed in the poison damage and it didn't poison me down to 0 health. So I would say in that way, I think it's much better than it was before. It's way better than it was before, and that's a good thing. I still think the devs need to really focus on red bar NPCs in the next NPC balancing update, and I'm going to keep banging this drum, guys, because if you don't bang the same drum a million times, it'll never happen. That's what I've learned. I bet that if they made red bar NPCs actually feel like the weakest NPC, then most people would be way happier with how the NPCs are in the game. It still feels like NPCs do a little too much damage, and that was meant to be addressed in 8.4, but like I said before, I think that's mainly due to red bar NPCs. If they could reduce their outgoing damage a lot, a little bit of the veterans damage maybe, and then leave elites as they are, I believe this will make the balancing feel about right. And it would make sense as well, because at the moment it kind of feels like red bars are doing the same damage as elites do. That's how it feels, and it shouldn't feel that way. So making those adjustments should bring it more in line. Again, 8.4 with those particular changes, they were incremental, they were subtle, and that's the right way to do it. We just need more. Now, TU8.4 included changes to PvP weapon damage overall, and then nerfs to rifles and MMRs. Now, I'm not going to lie here, I've literally not touched PvP in a very long time, because to me it's just a shambles, to put it politely. From what I've seen people saying, it appears the changes made are going in the right direction, but let's be honest, the game needs a huge PvP pass, the like we've never seen with this franchise. It appears many gear sets are broken and they just don't work as intended. There are many one-shot builds still. There are a lot of backpack talents that simply just do not work in a PvP environment. I'd encourage anyone to go watch Patrick Wolf's video on backpack talents. This will actually open your eyes just to how poorly managed PvP has been. And we already know that Redstorm are not doing this anymore, and the devs just don't have time to work on PvP stuff because they're too busy working on the broken stuff in PvE. So I'm thinking of making a video talking about whether the Division should just be PvE at this point, because, you know, PvP, unfortunately, it just does not exist. I mean, the Dark Zone, yeah, I like the Dark Zone. I think the Dark Zone is one of the selling points of the Division franchise, but it's just been neglected. You can go into the Dark Zone now, and most of your backpack talents, they just don't work. And that's just, yeah, PvP is a shambles. It needs a huge pass. The little changes they did were little, and that's about it. Moving on, Untitled Update 8.5, one of the biggest fixes was the control points, which thankfully works now, and I'm really happy about that because it means I can, you know, go in there, change the difficulty, reset them all, go and do them again, and farm them, which is exactly how it should work. The Revive Hive is still very much an issue. The update was meant to fix the manual Revive Hive on other players, but I've seen instances where this does not happen. And of course, the Auto Revive Hive, for me at least, still only works when it wants to. I've seen some people say it works absolutely, it's never gone wrong for them. Well, you must be lucky, because it just simply doesn't work a lot of the time, and it's yeah, still broken. I've not tested all of the fixes from 8.5, but from what I've seen, it appears most of them are working as intended, although I may be incorrect on that, so please let me know down below. I do know that the striker stacks do not work with the automatic shotguns like the ACS-12, and this is something the devs are actively looking into balancing. I understand the devs' hesitation with this because this became a problem in the Division, where auto shotguns allowed you to reach 100 stacks very quickly because each pellet counted as a stack, and I realised that the devs don't want that to return. However, from what I can tell, they're just not working at all, so let's see what the devs do about that. Adjustments were made to both the assault turret and the assault drone. Both received improvements to their targeting and general improvements to behaviour. But where are the buffs to the health? Let's be honest. Of course, all the skills need to be iterated on in respect of general improvements, but the biggest issue with skills like these are their health. The question I've got is, why would anyone use an assault drone in PvE, or a striker drone? The damage it does is negligible, and it gets blasted in less than 1 second because NPCs rightly auto-target the drone. The same applies to the turret and any skill that requires a line of sight to the NPCs. I mean, look at this tier 6 striker drone. It's got, and everyone can see the same if they do the same setup here, it's got 2.8 million health, and that's with an additional 8.3% health mod on it. The damage is 45k. I mean, this thing practically tickles any NPC above a red bar, and it gets one shot by red NPCs. The devs will need to do a lot more with skill health in the game, and otherwise most of the skills, for PvE at least, will remain completely redundant. And that's a real shame, because that's a huge part of the game. The 8.5 adjustments to these two particular skills, they're fine, right? We need iterations. We need to make sure that the skills and stuff get improvements, but we need to see a huge pass on skill health. They really need to be increased, especially, like I said, on skills that require a line of sight. Skills that don't require a line of sight, like, you know, mortars or whatever, not such a bad idea that they stay where they are, but ones that require a line of sight need a huge pass right away. In respect of Warhounds, I've still seen instances where the minigun Warhound would spin 3 times rather than the 2-sighted in the patch notes. Overall, the Warhounds don't appear to be that much different than before, really. That's all I've really got to say about Warhounds. I've never really had that much of an issue with Warhounds. What I did say is with the patch notes is they said that general, like the minigun Warhound, when it kind of runs around you and flanks you and stuff, that they wouldn't get as close as they were before. But my argument against that is, well, that kind of makes SMGs and weapons that struggle at range even less viable than they are now, because SMGs generally are not that viable currently, and that makes them even less viable in those instances. Personally, I never really had a problem with how Warhounds acted that much. The only issue I had with Warhounds is the Mortar Warhound, because the game is meant to be a cover-based shooter, right? And yet most of the stuff the NPCs use are there to push you out of cover where you're at your most vulnerable, and then you get one shot. And one of the problems with the Warhound, the Grenadier Warhound, was that it did exactly that, which is fine. There needs to be instances of that, but when it gets spammed at you, it becomes a little bit of a joke. And that hasn't really changed for me. It still feels the same. Alright guys, I'm going to leave it there, and completely off script here, what I'm just going to say is that I think ultimately the changes that have been made they're small, right? They're incremental, subtle changes. The fixes, for the most part that I've seen, the fixes have worked, but obviously there are still plenty of legacy bugs and new bugs that are cropping up all the time that the devs are always going to have to try and fix, right? That is the Division, and if you haven't accepted that by now, well, you're going to have to, because unfortunately that is the way the game has been and will always be, unfortunately. But yeah, these changes are subtle, they're incremental, and that, to me, is a good thing. The last thing I wanted the devs to do was just completely go one way, because that's what they've always done. And I like the approach that they're now making, where they make these little changes and they keep making those changes. Little and often is what I'd rather see than, not so often but big changes, because normally those big changes cause even more problems. Thanks very much for watching today's video, guys. Let me know what you think of Title Update 8.4 and 8.5 in the comments down below. With that said, until the next one, epic out.